Let me start by thanking the leadership of this conference, Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and the leader of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Krueger, as well as all of the Democratic conference members who worked so diligently to put this document together. But it wasn't just our Democratic conference. We took input from our colleagues across the aisle to make sure that this was a holistic view of this state, to make sure that we were addressing needs across this state, and it being a $175 billion document, resolution, I could be here all day talking about the issues that are addressed in this. I will touch on a few of the most important issues that we are dealing with. As has been mentioned, a $1.6 billion increase in education aid that will impact all of our districts across the state, not just helping our kids in public education, but to helping the communities that depend upon this money to keep their taxes down. The protections that are built into this document for the environment are historic in nature. We restored $550 million to our Medicaid funding that would have devastated the hospitals across this state. We are making them whole. We restored AIM funding in this package. We retained and expanding the film tax credit that is arguably the most beneficial tax credit program in the history of the state, according to industry leaders, creating thousands of jobs across this state that wouldn't have been created without that film tax credit. And perhaps one of the most important pieces addressed in this resolution is this conference taking the step to make the tax cap in the state of New York permanent. You want to help the middle class in the state of New York? You want to help keep taxes down across this state? We are imposing a permanent property tax cap in this state. That is an important step for this conference to take, and we are going to see it through to the end. On top of that, we addressed issues like child care funding and apprenticeship training all across the state. Save the Michaels of the world, a life-saving organization dealing with the opioid crisis, statewide program, is being addressed in this budget. Saving lives. And as the chairman of transportation, there's so many different issues that are addressed in this. Dealing with equity and parity across this state. Not only agreeing with what the governor proposed with the CHIPS funding, but taking into account all areas across the state, in particular, upstate. We increased CHIPS funding by $150 million. The municipalities across the state were clamoring for this funding. The $65 million for extreme winter recovery funds that will help communities, including in Western New York, that are so hard hit with the extreme winter, dealing with their transportation needs. And then we talk about the downstate transportation needs and the MTA and the heartbeat of our economy that is moving people around with the public transportation system, the Long Island Railroad, the subway system in the city, the Metro North, the congestion pricing plan that this conference is advancing in negotiations with the Assembly and the governor, taking into account what the community is calling for, to make sure not only are we funding the system, but that there is accountability and reform measures taking place at the same time. This week we'll be in Buffalo talking about public transportation, the fourth of 5 public hearings, unprecedented public hearings that for years the public has asked for on public transportation across this state, and it has not happened. This Democratic conference is taking those historic steps. And as it pertains to my own system out in Western New York, the NFTA, a $100 million 5-year capital fund that the NFTA has been calling for years that has been unaddressed by our colleagues across the aisle that we are now addressing in this document. Increasing STOA funds that Upstate has been calling for to the transit systems, including Rochester, Albany, Syracuse, and yes, Buffalo and Western New York and the NFTA. All the systems are getting more money. And again, on a local community perspective, when you talk about the NFTA expanding the light rail, $1 billion project that will come to Western New York with federal funds because of the $6 million that was included in this document. Not to mention the funds that we're advancing for the Skyway design competition, the $175,000 that we announced with the governor just a couple of weeks ago in Western New York that would be transformative in nature to continue the progress and the momentum. So I'm so excited to move this document today, to be supportive of it. I'm just so pleased with the work that our Democratic Conference has done. And I have got to tell you, I am a bit disappointed to hear some of the negative rhetoric coming from across the aisle, who has been in charge of this Senate chamber for the better part, not all, but the better part of 100 years. It's been 107 years that a Democratic majority has held this many seats in this chamber. 107 years. So I would say to my colleagues across the aisle, if they're complaining about people that are leaving this state, they ought to look in the mirror. And the fact of the matter is, the places that have been ignored over the years have been upstate and Western New York, and we are addressing them in this document. Thank you, Mr. President. I vote aye.